Hello, I'm Kesslin. My half-sister called me the strongest orphan she knew, right there in front of everyone at her wedding. They smiled, I stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean you don't feel every cut. They erased my mother, rewrote our past, and used my own money to celebrate it. What would you do if the people who owed you love gave you a spotlight just to humiliate you? Would you stay? Or would you do what I did and cancel everything? I stood in the entryway of the house I used to call home, the scent of lemon cleaner hitting my nose like a memory I didn't want to relive. The air was too still, too staged, like everything had been scrubbed clean of the years I lived here. I hadn't been back to Savannah in over a decade, and certainly not to this house. But here I was, 3 weeks before Mallory's wedding, pretending like I belonged. I'd barely set down my suitcase when I noticed it. The photo wall above the fireplace, once cluttered with school pictures, family vacations, and a single portrait of my mother, was now curated to perfection. Centered where my mother's photo used to be was a blown-up image of my father and Charla, all decked out in pastel pinks at their vow renewal ceremony. There was no trace of Lorna, no wedding photo, no snapshots of her holding me in her arms on the porch swing. Nothing. I stared at it longer than I should have. Charla had the wall redone for the rehearsal dinner, Mallory said, as she breezed past me, arms full of peony samples and a clipboard. It's all about aesthetics. Of course it was. No one said a word about the change. No one acted like it was strange. To them, that space had always belonged to Charla. My mother? A technicality, a smudge on the frame. That night, as I unpacked the few things I brought, I left the closet door open. It still smelled like cedar, and faintly of my mother's old perfume. I lay down, but didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow and steady, trying to slow my thoughts to match. The next morning, I came downstairs early. Habit, I guess. I was always the first one awake growing up. Being early meant avoiding small talk and navigating tension in silence. Charla was already at the stove, flipping pancakes with the same precision she used to slice me out of the narrative. You always were an early riser, she said, not turning around. Just like your father. I nodded, unsure what to say. We weren't built for casual conversation. You know, she continued, we tried to give you everything after your mother passed. It wasn't easy for any of us. I didn't respond. I wanted to say, no, you gave Mallory everything. I got what was left, but instead, I poured coffee and sat at the end of the table. The truth, my father had married Charla first. Mallory was their child. But when they divorced and he met my mom, things changed. For a while. He remarried, had me, and for a brief moment, we were a family. Until I turned 9 and Mom got sick. When she died, they didn't even let me miss school for the funeral. I came home to find our family photos boxed up in the garage, labeled MISC. A year later, Charla was back in the house, wearing beige and smiling like the years in between never happened. They called it a fresh start. To them, I was a reminder of the years they'd rather forget. Later that afternoon, we were gathered in the dining room discussing seating arrangements. I offered a small suggestion, one I knew I'd regret bringing up the second it left my mouth. I was thinking maybe we could put a small photo of Mom on the memory table, I said. You know, just one, for tradition. There was a pause, the kind that feels like a slap. I think we should keep things current, Charla replied. It's Mallory's day, after all. Mallory didn't even look up from her phone. My father just shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. And that was that. I didn't argue. But this time, I didn't let it go either. I logged it, noted it deep inside. Like a tally mark on a chalkboard no one else could see. Strike one. That evening, I wandered the hallway again, unable to stop myself from facing that wall. The blank space where my mother's photo used to hang called to me like a wound you keep pressing, just to make sure it still hurts. It did. By the time I went back upstairs, the silence of the hallway was too loud. It rang in my ears louder than any insult. I left my shoes by the door, tugged my cardigan tighter around me, and crawled into bed with a tightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd done that already, for years. I'd run out of tears. What I had now was awareness and maybe a little anger. 2 weeks out from the wedding, Mallory texted me out of the blue. Dress fittings at noon. Thought you might want to watch. She didn't say help, didn't ask me to come, just watch, like I was some extra on a film set of her life. I didn't respond. I just showed up. The bridal studio was full of ivory lace, glassy chandeliers, and women pretending to whisper while watching each other's reflections. I pushed through a curtain and stopped cold. Mallory stood on the fitting pedestal, smiling into the mirror, surrounded by layers of white satin. But not just any dress. It was my mother's wedding dress. My breath hitched, but I didn't let it show, at least not outwardly. The hem had been chopped, the neckline altered into something sharp and trendy, and the delicate lace my mom once told me came from her grandmother's sewing kit was gone. Completely gone. Mallory caught my reflection in the mirror and lit up. "Oh, good! You're here!" I took a step forward, my hands curling into fists in the pockets of my coat. "I thought you'd like to see it," she said, spinning slowly. "It needed a modern touch. I know Mom left it for you, but it just fits me better." She said Mom like it belonged to both of us, like that woman raised her. Charla stood nearby, sipping a flute of lemon water, her hand resting gently on Mallory's shoulder. "It's a lovely sentiment, Kesslin," she added with a sugar-sweet tone. "I'm sure you'll wear something equally meaningful." Equally meaningful. I bit the inside of my cheek and forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mallory twirled again, beaming. "The tailor said it was almost like it was made for me." It wasn't made for her. It was worn by my mother, stored away for me. And now, it looked like it belonged to someone who'd never even said her name aloud. "I'm not sure what I'll wear yet," I said finally. "Well," Mallory grinned, "don't wait too long. People might think you're not planning to come." I turned away before they could see what was in my eyes. Later that night, I found myself in the attic, sitting cross-legged in front of the old keepsake chest my mother left behind. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers traced the lid before I lifted it. Inside, yellowed letters, old photos, and the small velvet box that used to house her gold locket. The box was empty. I blinked, checked beneath the silk lining, shuffled through the envelopes. Gone. The next morning, during the rehearsal walkthrough at the church, I spotted Mallory at the altar in her rehearsal outfit, cool and composed. Hanging delicately around her neck was the locket, my mother's locket. When I approached, she saw me looking. "Oh, this?" she said casually, touching it. "I borrowed it. It felt right. You're not the only one who misses her, you know." I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I just stared at her for a long moment. Then I remembered something my mother once told me. A quiet piece of wisdom whispered to me as a child curled beside her in bed after another exhausting day. "Sometimes silence is the strongest shield. Don't waste your breath where it won't be heard." So I breathed, deeply, and walked away. That night, back in the room I once wallpapered with magazine clippings and dreams of being anywhere else, I laid my outfit for the wedding across the bed. It was simple, black, clean lines, unapologetically plain. I opened my suitcase and nestled the empty velvet box into one of the side compartments. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't about the necklace. It was never about the dress. It was about the way they took pieces of her and gave them to Mallory like they were heirlooms she'd earned, as if existence was inheritance. I zipped the suitcase slowly, and in doing so, I felt something else seal shut inside me too. Some small corner of my hope, that Mallory might ever see me as more than a formality. I turned off the light and let the darkness settle. The next morning started with a cloudy sky and a thicker silence than usual. I dressed quickly, not bothering with makeup or earrings. There was no one here I needed to impress. Mallory had scheduled a meeting at the country club to finalize the seating chart and go over last-minute vendor issues. Apparently, my presence was optional but appreciated, according to the group text Charla sent out, as if I were part of some volunteer committee, not blood. The lounge was filled with soft piano music and the smell of fresh croissants. Mallory and Charla sat at a long table with a laptop open and a stack of color-coded printouts in front of them. Dad was there too, thumbing through a magazine with pictures of luxury yachts, his default move when he didn't want to be involved, but also didn't want to leave. I sat off to the side, sipping ice water, trying to make myself invisible. But I caught a glimpse of the seating plan laid out across the table. The names were typed in small script, arranged by table numbers and relationships. Bride's family, groom's family, bridal party, close friends. Then there was a section labeled Other Guests. That's where I saw my name, wedged between an old neighbor from Charlotte's side and someone listed as cousinish. I felt my stomach sink, but my face didn't move. I took another sip of water and leaned back slightly to get a better look, hoping I had misread it. Charlotte noticed. "Oh, don't worry about that. It's just alphabetical. The software does that automatically." Mallory didn't even bother to glance up. She was texting again. Probably about flower arrangements or which playlist would keep people from falling asleep between courses. No one corrected it. No one said, "Oops, let's fix that." I sat still, completely still, and let the chill settle into my bones. It wasn't about seating anymore. It was about what they thought of me, what role they assigned me when they thought no one would notice. The day passed in a blur after that. I went through the motions, nodding when asked, helping with minor logistics like moving chairs or confirming the bakery delivery. But my mind was elsewhere, circling that label like it had teeth. The next day, there was a bridal brunch hosted at a nearby vineyard. Sunlight poured in through the wide windows, catching on champagne glasses and pastel floral centerpieces. Women in dresses that cost more than my rent mingled, laughed, and complimented Mallory like she was some kind of royal being coronated. A bell rang lightly, and Mallory stood up, clinking her mimosa glass. "I just want to take a moment to thank my amazing bridal party," she beamed. "You ladies are my ride or dies, my soul sisters. I can't imagine this weekend without you." There was clapping. A few women wiped their eyes. Someone I didn't know turned to me and whispered, "Wait, aren't you her sister?" Mallory heard it. She laughed lightly and said, "Oh, Keslin's not really into this stuff. She's more of a minimalist." Minimalist. Not family. Not important. Just not the right aesthetic, apparently. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. But my silence made a louder statement than any outburst could have. That night, back at the house, I was heading down the hallway toward my room when I heard heels clicking behind me. "Keslin," Mallory called. I stopped but didn't turn. "Look," she said, her tone tight. "I'm trying really hard to keep this weekend smooth. Don't make this about you." I faced her slowly. "It's already not about me. You made sure of that." She crossed her arms, the defensive tilt of her head showing. "This day is about family." I let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Then maybe you should have invited mine." Her jaw tightened. She didn't reply, just turned and walked off like she had somewhere important to be, like her reflection mattered more than her roots. I walked the rest of the way to my room, stepped inside, and turned the lock. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to stop the old me, the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who smoothed over every rough edge, from walking back out into that hallway and apologizing for making things uncomfortable. This time, I let it be uncomfortable. Morning slipped into late afternoon before I left the room. I'd spent most of the day with the curtains drawn, letting the world carry on without me. But by 6, I had to show up. Rehearsal dinner, vineyard rental, catered menu, and all. My name might have been left off the programs, but my RSVP hadn't been lost in translation. The venue was beautiful, in that curated way Instagram loves. Fairy lights, floating candles, polished wine glasses lined up in military precision. A floral arch framed the head table, draped in cascading whites and soft blush. I could practically hear Charla in my head. A vineyard says elegance without being pretentious. Sure. If elegance meant erasing lineage one toast at a time, the room buzzed with that kind of rehearsed joy. Over-polished smiles, overly loud laughs, the way people carry conversation when they're more aware of being watched than being heard. I chose a seat at the far end of the table, near the wall, where I could watch without being noticed. It was easier that way. Being a ghost was less painful than being deliberately ignored. Eventually, Mallory stood and tapped her glass with a fork. The room hushed. All eyes turned to her. Even the servers paused. She looked radiant. I'll give her that. Confident, poised, rehearsed. like a keynote speaker delivering a performance, not a sister remembering her roots. "I just want to say thank you," she began, voice sweet but steady. "First to my amazing friends who've made this week unforgettable, and of course to my soon-to-be husband, for loving me exactly as I am." Soft laughter. "But most of all," she continued, raising her glass, "to my father, for raising me alone, for teaching me how to be strong, independent, and grounded." There it was. A silence rang out louder than any applause. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just turned slightly to look at him, my father, sitting beside her, smiling faintly, lifting his wineglass like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't wince, didn't correct her, didn't even glance in my direction. That wasn't an oversight. That was a rewrite, a public erasure wrapped in a compliment. Lorna's name wasn't just absent, it had been buried. And I realized in that moment that grief isn't just about losing someone. It's also about what happens when their memory gets auctioned off like an estate no one wanted to maintain. After dinner, I slipped out early, walked the gravel path toward the back parking lot under the fading light. I didn't say goodbye. No one noticed. The next morning, Charlotte called me into the bridal suite. "We're doing a quick dry run," she said brightly, handing me a spool of ribbon. "Want to help tie the favor boxes?" I nodded, more out of habit than willingness, and joined the others in a circle of activity and hairspray. That's when I saw it. On the groom's hand. The ring. Gold, vintage, delicate engraving on the inner band. It was my mother's wedding ring. The one Burke had promised me on a crisp fall day 5 years ago, when we visited Mom's grave, and he cried harder than I'd ever seen him cry. The one he swore I'd have. "When the time feels right," he'd said, eyes swollen, voice thin. Apparently, the time had felt right for someone else. I didn't speak until Charla leaned over and caught my stare. She smiled almost proudly. "We thought it was poetic," she said. "You know, full circle." Poetic. My grief was now a metaphor to match her aesthetic. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest and said calmly, "My mother is not a metaphor for your closure." Charla blinked. "It's just a ring." "No," I said, "it was a promise, but clearly that meant something different to all of you." She didn't argue, just turned back to tying bows, as if we hadn't spoken at all. That night, I sat on the porch of the guest house alone, a glass of red wine balanced in one hand, my phone in the other. I scrolled to the shared wedding itinerary. My name was listed twice, venue support, logistics runner. I tapped into the calendar app and deleted both entries. Then I opened the notes section and typed, "You seem to have everything covered." I hit send and put the phone face down beside me. The vineyard lights twinkled in the distance. Laughter echoed from the main house. But I sat still, finally letting the air around me settle without expectation. This wasn't walking away. Not yet. But it was the moment the cord began to fray. The day my mother died was one kind of loss. But the day they used her memory as wallpaper, that was the day I stopped mourning. I didn't sleep much that night. Something inside had shifted, not snapped, not broken, but clicked, like a gear finding its notch after grinding too long against a false setting. By morning, I was sitting at the edge of the reception venue's private lounge, going over spreadsheets no one else would bother opening. Line items, vendor confirmations, unpaid balances, they were mine. I had signed the checks, placed the deposits, smoothed the edges of every vision Mallory and Charlotte tossed at me like I was some hired assistant with a clipboard. They never once asked how much I'd already contributed, or what else was due. They just assumed I'd keep showing up with answers and receipts. Charla walked in with a latte in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She didn't greet me. "We'll go over final floor plan and guest flow," she announced to the room. "We'll want to seat the donors close to the dance floor, of course, and the media table to the left of the cake display." Media? I glanced up, confused. Someone was live streaming this? Mallory breezed in next, humming something upbeat, her phone glued to her palm. She barely acknowledged me as she dumped her purse onto a nearby chair. "Oh, we printed thank you cards," she said suddenly, pulling out a neat stack. "For everyone who made this happen." She began handing them out. One for the florist, one for the event planner, one for the photographer, Even the bakery delivery guy, who poked his head in for 5 seconds, got one. When she reached me, she paused, just long enough to be awkward, then passed me entirely. I said nothing. Charla must have noticed the pause. Keslin's more behind the scenes, she said with a wave. She's the detail person, the glue, you know. Mallory chimed in, not even looking up. Yeah, numbers are kinda her thing. I kept my eyes on the spreadsheet, refusing to blink faster than necessary. If I looked up, they'd see it. That I heard them, that it landed, that it lodged somewhere it shouldn't. I pressed my finger to the laptop's trackpad and closed the tab. That evening, I sat on the patio of my hotel with a glass of ginger ale sweating in my hand. I wasn't in the mood for wine, not after what I'd seen. Curiosity had gotten the better of me. I'd clicked the fundraiser link they'd plastered across Facebook, Instagram, even the email signature on Mallory's bridal updates. The page greeted me with a photo I hadn't seen in over 20 years. My mother, Lorna, holding a baby Mallory in the backyard of our old house. The photo was cropped tightly, zoomed in just enough to cut me out completely. I remembered standing next to them, maybe 5 years old, in a yellow sundress with strawberries on the hem. Gone. Erased. Underneath it, the caption read, "Our mom always said love should be celebrated big. Our mom. $8,000 raised under a lie." I stared at the photo longer than I should have, not because I was in it, but because I wasn't. That picture had come from my storage box. I'd scanned it years ago to preserve it after water damage ruined the album. No one else had a digital copy, which meant someone had gone into my things or downloaded it from somewhere they weren't invited. This wasn't nostalgia. It was theft. I didn't text Mallory. I didn't call. I didn't scream. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up my payment queue, and found the pending charge to the DJ, a vendor Mallory insisted on, someone with a light-up stage and customized playlists. I clicked cancel. Then I drafted an email. "Hi Derek, please redirect your final invoice to the bride's family. I will no longer be covering this cost. Do not use my mother's name in this wedding again. Best Keslin Draper." I read it over once, no fluff, no explanations, no apology. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop and sat back. The wind picked up a little, brushing a few loose leaves against my ankle. Somewhere off in the distance, someone's speaker played a Frank Sinatra song I couldn't quite make out. Probably a couple rehearsing a first dance they didn't pay for. I didn't want revenge, but I wasn't going to keep sponsoring the ceremony of my own erasure. Let them scramble. Let them figure it out. I paid for the stage, yes, but I sure as hell didn't owe them the spotlight. The next morning was unusually quiet. No chatter outside my door, no texts buzzing about seating arrangements or urgent vendor questions. I welcomed the stillness, even if it felt like a silence made of glass, clear, fragile, and easy to shatter. I was invited to the bridal suite, not by Mallory, but through a sticky note slid under my door. In Charla's handwriting it read, "Need help with final layout. Bring calm energy." That last line almost made me laugh. They never wanted my presence, just my composure, my ability to fix things without making noise. The suite was already humming when I arrived. Hair dryers blowing, perfume mist in the air, champagne being poured too early for anyone not playing pretend. I stayed near the back, a neutral observer, until my gaze caught a glossy booklet on the makeup table. The wedding program. I picked it up and scanned the inside cover. There it was in looping cursive beneath a sepia-toned engagement photo. Mallory Vexley, only daughter of Burke and Charla Vexley. Only daughter. My fingers curled slightly around the edge of the page. It wasn't a mistake. It was design. Intention. This wasn't just about flowers or fonts anymore. This was a deliberate rewrite of our family's record, and my mother had been deleted again. I felt the air shift behind me. Mallory stepped closer, tilting her head as if I were overreacting. "Avi wrote it," she said casually. "Not me." Like that excused it. I held her eyes longer than I ever had before. Her smirk faltered, just a little. Then she turned away, as if bored by the confrontation. I slipped the program into my bag and left without another word. Back in my hotel room, I dropped the program on the desk and opened my laptop. An unread email had landed from Avi. I clicked it open, assuming it was a schedule reminder. It wasn't. Attached was a draft of the final itinerary, but that wasn't the problem. Below it was the entire email thread between Mallory, Charla, and Avi herself. Charla: let's avoid references to the previous marriage. It's confusing and we want to keep things clean. Mallory: yeah, don't include Kesslin in anything formal. No speeches, no close-ups during the ceremony. It'll be easier for everyone. Avi had replied, understood, keeping her presence minimal. Minimal? I wasn't even a footnote. I was an inconvenience they had to manage off-camera. I read the email chain twice, saved the whole thread to a secure folder, and printed a hard copy. Not because I planned to confront them with it, no. This wasn't a public screaming match. This was leverage. They erased me in ink? Fine. I'd use paper too. That afternoon I called up Trevor, the AV technician overseeing the reception's video montage setup. Hi Trevor, I said evenly. I helped fund the projection package for the evening portion of the event. He confirmed. Yep, we're using your files, pictures, video clips, that sort of thing. Don't, I said simply. You no longer have permission to use any content I submitted. A pause on his end. Is everything okay? I won't be part of something I've been written out of, I replied. Please update the files accordingly and notify me when it's done. After that call, I forwarded the printed program and email thread to myself again, storing them in multiple folders. One copy I saved with the title, Truth They Buried. Then I typed up a short message to Charla, just enough to cut without bleeding. If my name is to be deleted, so is my support. Expect revised invoices. I didn't sign it with my name, I signed it, The Daughter You Erased. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't pace or rehearse arguments I'd never say out loud. Instead, I sat on the balcony, wrapped in my mother's old cardigan, and listened to the muffled sounds of rehearsal dinner laughter drifting up from the lawn below. I imagined them rehearsing lines for a script that had no part for me. But they forgot something. I still held the receipts, and not just the financial kind. By the time I walked into the reception hall, I had already rehearsed my silence. I planned to stay at the edge of the room, sip something bitter, and leave before dessert. But plans don't always survive impact. The air was thick with perfume and self-congratulation. I kept to myself, nodding politely at a few distant relatives I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. The chandelier flickered over white linens, rose-colored napkins, and rows of champagne flutes, all carefully curated, none of it sincere. Then the microphone crackled to life. Mallory stood under the arch of baby's breath and eucalyptus, holding her speech cards like she'd practiced this moment since childhood. Maybe she had. I just want to thank everyone for being here, she began. This day, this family, means the world to me. My jaw already felt tight. She continued with her script. Praise for the vendors, for Dad's support, for Charla's unwavering guidance. Then came the pivot. And to my maid of honor, Avi, who's been like a sister to me, she beamed. That's when she looked directly at me. I mean, technically I have a sister, she said with a playful shrug. But let's be honest. Growing up with a real family taught me what love looks like. Not everyone gets that, but Kesslin, she tried. People laughed, lightly, uncomfortably. The kind of laugh you give when you're not sure what's a joke and what's cruelty dressed as one. Mallory lifted her glass. To the strongest orphan I know, always proving she belongs one spreadsheet at a time. And just like that, the air snapped inside my lungs. A few eyes turned toward me. Some guests looked down into their drinks, embarrassed on my behalf. I saw Burke's expression, vacant, passive, the same one he wore at Mom's graveside. I stood slowly and slipped out the side door, each step steady, but burning. The hallway outside was dim and empty. I walked past the guestbook table, past the memory display, where not a single photo of my mother remained, and ducked into a quiet alcove. My hands shook as I opened my purse. I kept it with me always, the last letter Mom wrote before she died, folded carefully, yellowed slightly at the edges. I unfolded it, needing to see her handwriting, needing something real. What I found was torn, not just creased, ripped. Two halves, one still clinging to her closing line, the other jagged and missing the start. And right there, in the trash beside the bridal suite door, I saw it. The other piece. Crumpled. I didn't make a sound. Didn't cry. Just stood still for a few long seconds, pressing my thumb into my palm like a pressure valve. They hadn't just humiliated me. They desecrated what little I had left of her. I pulled out my phone. Screenshots of the email chain, the deleted invoices, the rewritten program, the cropped fundraiser image. All of it. I uploaded them to a private folder. Then I opened my gallery and took a photo of the torn letter. Both pieces aligned on the marble hallway table like a crime scene I was done hiding. Back inside, the music had just begun. Some mid-tempo number Mallory had probably chosen to pair with their first dance. I stepped through the doors and walked straight to the stage. Avi's eyes widened. Charla leaned into Burke, whispering fast. Mallory turned and froze when she saw me. I reached for the mic. "I won't keep you long," I said, voice steady. "But before you dance, let's talk about what you buried to get here." The room froze. Not a fork moved. "You erased my mother," I said. "Not just from photos, not just from speeches, but from the very paper you handed your guests. You printed a lie." A hush fell so deep, I heard someone set their glass down 2 tables away. "And when you called me an orphan," I continued, turning toward Mallory, "you weren't just making a joke. You were making a declaration that I'm not part of this, that I never was." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand before she could speak. "I stayed quiet for years. Let you take and take, but I won't watch you dance on what's left of my mother's name." Then I reached into my purse, pulled out the torn letter, and held it up. "This? You couldn't even leave this untouched. You couldn't leave her untouched." People whispered now. One of Mallory's friends put a hand to her mouth. Avi stepped back like she wanted to disappear. I looked at the crowd, then back at my sister. "You made this about family, Mallory. But what you built here, it's a set, and I'm done being the stagehand." I placed the microphone on the stand, and I walked out. Not hurried, not shaking. I left the silence behind like a match left burning. The ballroom door whispered shut behind me, and for a moment, I stood there in the quiet. Just me, the distant hum of air vents, and the echo of everything I hadn't said over the years. Then I turned around, walked back toward the noise, and stepped onto that stage not as a guest, not as a sister, but as a witness. The room hadn't moved. Mallory was still frozen, her mouth parted slightly, wineglass trembling in her hand. Burke avoided eye contact, busy pretending his watch needed polishing. Charla clutched her napkin like it held the script she no longer controlled. I reached for the AD microphone one last time. "You wanted a performance," I said, my voice even. "You choreographed a day of smiles, of curated speeches, and photos with the edges trimmed." I looked at the crowd, dozens of them, faces I'd grown up around, some I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. "They wrote me out," I continued, "but my mother taught me how to write back, not with lipstick or guilt, but with ink." Gasps were swallowed into silence. I pulled a folded sheet from my bag, one of the programs from the ceremony, the one that read Mallory Vexley, only daughter of Burke and Charla Vexley. I held it high for all to see. "This isn't an oversight. It's not about fonts or space or formatting. It's a decision," I said. "To erase, to rewrite, to silence." I glanced at Mallory. "But you forgot something. You don't get to build a legacy with borrowed memories." Then came the part I didn't rehearse, because pain never needs practice. "Effective immediately," I said, "I withdraw all remaining support for this event, financial, emotional, familial. I am no longer participating in this ceremony, this marriage, or this performance." I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't need it. I stepped down and moved across the room. My heels barely made a sound on the carpet, but it felt like the ground was shifting underneath every table I passed. Charla blinked rapidly as I handed her a white envelope, sealed and labeled in my handwriting. "In case you ever wonder why I left," it said. Burke got the same. Mallory's envelope was last. She stared at it like it might bite her. I didn't speak. I just let it rest on the white linen before her, beside a plate she hadn't touched. I turned and walked away, straight through the crowd. A few guests whispered. Others followed me with their eyes. One of Mallory's college friends mouthed the word "wow," like she was watching the ending of a movie she never expected. Near the door, I stopped. "I hope," I said without turning, "when you think of this day, when the photos are framed and the cake is long gone, you remember this moment too." And then I walked out. The sun had dipped low enough that the parking lot was soaked in orange light. I took my time down the stone steps, the scent of roses clinging to the air like something trying too hard to stay sweet. My phone buzzed, a message from the venue DJ. "Need final confirmation on playlist. Guest request override?" I tapped out a reply. "Play track 17. Set it to loop once." That song wasn't on the official set list, but I made sure it made the final cut. It was the last song my mother ever sang to me, on a night when I couldn't sleep, wrapped in a fleece blanket, while she hummed lullabies over dishes in the kitchen. As I reached the car and sat behind the wheel, I rolled the window down and waited. A few seconds later, the notes began. Soft at first, then spilling through the open doors of the reception hall like a quiet truth they couldn't shut out. Inside, they might have tried to carry on. Pretend nothing happened, but music tells the truth, even when people lie. Somewhere in that crowd, a few guests stood. One older woman walked out behind me and whispered, "Your mother would have been proud." I nodded, didn't speak. There was no need. I didn't leave to hurt them. I left so they'd finally have to sit with what they'd done. I didn't burn the bridge. They did. I just lit it, so everyone could see. The flight back to Portland was silent in that specific way early morning flights are. No small talk, no clinking of drink carts. Just tired bodies carrying the weight of wherever they'd been. I stared out the window, not watching the clouds, but thinking about what I didn't say in that room. I wasn't angry anymore. Something had burned clean. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday, I pulled into a small parking lot outside Brookside Haven, a modest assisted living facility nestled between sycamore trees and an overgrown rose garden. I didn't call ahead, didn't go in. I'd heard about Dad's minor stroke through a forwarded text. No signature. Just a sterile update. Charla hadn't bothered with warmth. Mallory hadn't bothered at all. I stepped out of the car with one item in hand, a framed 4x6 photo of my mother, Lorna, standing barefoot in our old backyard, a lemon in one hand, and a smile so real it still ached to see. I walked into the front desk, left it along with a sealed envelope. The note inside simply said, she was more than a placeholder. No name, no explanation. Let them guess. Let them remember the woman they replaced, not just in title, but in narrative. I walked away without looking back. By the time I got home to my apartment in Portland, dusk had started to settle. My new place was small, just 2 bedrooms and a patio, but the silence was mine. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cardboard. I was still unpacking. One of the last boxes I opened was marked Mom's Things. Inside, the repaired letter, its edges taped neatly, the gold locket, and a blank, leather-bound journal I bought the day after the wedding. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the journal in my lap. I opened to the first page and wrote in firm, even strokes, "You didn't get to finish your story, Mom, but I'll write mine, with your voice in every line." The words sat on the page like an anchor that finally found a seabed. There was no need to write about Mallory anymore, or Charla, or even Dad. They weren't the ending. They were the noise I walked through to find the next chapter. That night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, opened my laptop, and hovered over a message draft I'd been writing for days. It was addressed to Mallory. "You didn't just lose a sister," it began. "You lost someone who would have protected your legacy better than anyone else. I hope the spotlight was worth the silence that will follow." I stared at it, reread it, then deleted it. I didn't need to send it. She'd hear the silence soon enough. The next tab I opened was social media. I scrolled through the photos I'd been tagged in from the wedding, faces smiling through tension, the filtered brightness of curated moments. I hit remove tag on each one by one, until nothing remained. Then I signed out, for good. No post, no farewell, just a quiet click and a small breath out. Later, I stood on my tiny balcony with the city lights stretching far beneath me. I held the locket in one hand, felt the weight of it settle against my palm like it belonged there all along. She wasn't erased. I just had to find where her story continued, and it was in me all along, in how I left, in how I healed, in how I finally stopped asking to be seen and chose, instead, to live as if I already was. Some wounds don't scar. They stay open, just enough to remind you you survived. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean you've given up. It means you finally decided to stop begging to be seen. For years, I tried to earn my place in a family that treated my presence like a footnote, if they acknowledged me at all. But here's what I've learned. You don't need permission to take up space in your own story, and you sure as hell don't need to stay where love is only given in pieces, with conditions. Maybe you've been the one holding the camera but never in the frame. Maybe you've paid the price but weren't even thanked. Maybe you've kept quiet so others could feel comfortable. But let me ask you, at what point do you stop waiting to be invited and start building your own table? This isn't just my story. It might be yours too. And if it is, maybe it's time to stop shrinking. Maybe it's time to speak. If this story touched something in you, or reminded you of a moment you stayed silent when you should have stood tall, drop a 1 in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if this story didn't sit right with you, tell me why. Your thoughts matter too. No yelling here, just stories and truth. If this video moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect even just a little, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. I've got more stories, some painful, some redemptive, all real. Until next time, may you never let anyone rewrite your worth.